Well, greetings everyone, and welcome to a special online event today called Goddesses in Every Woman, How Discovering Your Natural Archetype Can Liberate Your Full Expression. My name is Stephen Dinan, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Shift Network, and I'm truly delighted and honored to be hosting this program today with a woman who is something of a legend in the field of Jungian psychology and feminine psychology in general. Her name is Shinoda Bolen, and her teachings really invite those of us on a path of growth and development to embrace the deeper stories and archetypes that often are unfolding beneath our surface drama of our lives. She spent 3 decades of immersing herself in science and mysticism and psychology and activism, and really bridging between a lot of different worlds and developing a lot of revolutionary findings about women's psychology in particular, drawing from prototypes and archetypes drawn from Greek goddesses. Her book, Goddesses in Every Woman, was a runaway hit for many, many years and still continues to sell. I think it's over 600,000 copies now, and it really speaks to the deeper reasons why it's like understanding the archetypal forces underpinning our psychology are so important. So she's really helps to bridge the kind of Jungian understanding to the practical challenges of living in a modern world. So we're really delighted to host today's program, and just want to give you a warm welcome, Jean.
Thanks, Stephen. It's an adventure to be with you, and one that I responded to the invitation because of the synchronicities that seemed to encourage me to come aboard. So that's why, actually, that's the major reason for deciding that I wanted to try this out and wanted to take what I do in my office and my books out to people that otherwise would not come across, would not meet. Kinds of things
well, we are too.
That could inspire
we
them
are totally
to be
honored
themselves.
and so we're honored that you've chosen to do that with us. And it was a fortuitous meeting and as a synchronistic meeting that at the Parliament of World Religions that led to today's call. And I also just want to let people know up front that we are going to have a chance to go much deeper with Jean. She's agreed really for the first time ever to offer a virtual program that takes the work with the goddesses and archetypes to a whole nother level. It's called Liberating the Goddesses in You, Deepening Your Life's Journey Through the Wisdom of 7 Feminine Archetypes. So we're going to start that program in a few weeks, and so we'll hear some about that towards the end of today because it's a very exciting next step to this journey. So, Jean, it's always nice to start with a little bit of a personal backstory, since it doesn't always get into the books and the teachings in public, and give people a little bit of a sense for why were you drawn to investigate the deeper archetypes and goddesses, and why did they become significant personally in your life, and perhaps maybe even what archetype you yourself most identify with?
Well, the reason I got into writing Goddesses in Every Woman is, again, because of synchronistic meetings and directions. It's sort of like following the breadcrumbs that say, you know, this is coming up, it feels right, say yes. So I'd written a book on synchronicity, which, after all, is a pretty deeply psychological, mystical kind of thing, and the word synchronicity and the concept was defined by Carl Jung, and I am a Jungian analyst and a psychiatrist, but I had started Psychic Magazine with my former husband, Jim Bolen, and so was fully and deeply aware of the parapsychological, amazing kinds of worlds of the invisible. And Jung is the only depth psychologist, the only theoretical basis for being spiritual at the bedrock of what it is that I am doing here. And we do choose the kind of belief system, psychological theory that resonates most deeply with ourselves. And Jung's did for me, because my own path was one of being in touch with a deeply spiritual motivation. And Jung calls that the self, largest self. And self can be defined as God or goddess or the Tao or all that is, or the universe, or or higher power. It's something we all have access to, and that's one of the major important elements in my own life and what I want to connect people to. That while I will be talking about the various goddesses, they're in every temple that made a god-goddess a sacred precinct, there was a sacred fire that was the goddess Hestia. Now, a fire in the center of a round hearth that makes the space a sacred place is the same as Jung's concept in a geometrical form of the self. So when you are in touch with the archetypal depth and the self, you will move in your life with an inner compass that lets you know that this is the soul journey you're on, because essentially I think of depth psychology as doing soul work. I think of it as connecting people with what is truly their deep meaning for being here. We all come into this world vulnerable, but we all have a sense that there's a purpose to life here. And one of the major things that I find that the archetypes, gods and goddesses, help people to do is to realize that there is an innate talent or instinct or archetype that if they live from that archetype, there is a sense of deeper meaning. So my path goes back to age 16 or 17, when I was idealistic, when I was open to being touched by the experience of feeling the humility of thinking that I was pretty big stuff, and then realizing that everything that I was being honored, and I did student government, got good grades, I was a national debater, I thought I was pretty hot stuff. And then I realized that every single thing that I was claiming for myself was a gift to me, to be who I was, where I was. These are things beyond anything that I had to do with. And once I got into gratitude, and I think humility really helps one to become grateful. I think there's a shift sometimes from being aware that but for the grace of whatever it is, there go I. And that is what changed my life, made me think that the only way that I could possibly express my gratitude was to do for others, to help other people, to do service. And that led me to medicine and to psychiatry, to Jungian analysis, and to my activism and authoring that I do. But it was, it's actually a rather labyrinthine path, because once I decided that this is what I needed to do from a deep place and promised God or self that this is what I would do, I then had to come up against what I knew inside with the reality that science, which is required pre-med, was not my gift. My gifts were really in understanding stories and mythology and history and things like that. And so to come full circle, to have entered a profession for reasons that had to do with my spiritual path, and then find that the synchronicities brought me to Jung, and then full circle, that which mattered to me greatly when I was a college student and continues to be interesting to me, could be woven into this path. And this is where goddesses come into, the archetypes come into it. Because archetypes are like telling stories that sink deeply into the psychic and spiritual matrix of the person. And certainly it's been true for me.
For people that don't have as much background with the Jungian understanding of archetypes, I'd love for you just to explain a little bit what an archetype is, and I liked what you were sharing before about how it's like moving to a state of gratitude for what's moving through you. So, because we can kind of, it's like a relationship we're creating with an archetype, and that if we can get too inflated or too attached or too disconnected, but there's actually kind of like a right relationship, it sounds like.
You're absolutely right, and well said. I think of an archetype as being like, well, first of all, archetypes are innate. They're in all of us. All of the archetypes are potentials in all human beings. It's part of our species patterning. Just as our capacity to do anything that is human has some counterpart in the collective unconscious, in the species patterning that we tap into. So an archetype is sort of like an ability that's innate to you. Say that you have an innate ability to use your mind. And when you discover how your mind can put things together, the excitement, the pleasure at it. But imagine if you were never encouraged to learn and to have the material in which you could put things together. And then when you did, there would be an aha, a sense of the beauty for you of this Athena field, for example. Or suppose you were a natural musician in a family that never brought you to a concert, that you never picked up a musical instrument until midlife. You were so on track to live out what your parents expected you to do in the world and to live out who they thought you were. Then somewhere around midlife, you might find yourself feeling, is this all there is? I've done what I'm supposed to have done, and is this all there is? And then maybe you take a community college course in something that you've been sort of attracted to, and bingo, you find that there is a natural kind of response to it. You come alive. Well, this is what archetypes are, really. They are patterns that vary from person to person in terms of how much of each one is innately you. So just as music and intellect and athleticism and all these things that are common to human species, these archetypes are common to us all, but we are inherently stronger in some. Some become the major archetype throughout our lives, and we follow the track of developing it. Other times we live out an archetype for a certain period of time, and then it seems like, well, I don't have that much energy for that. For example, my archetype is Artemis. She is the goddess of the hunt and goddess of the moon. Her symbol is the bow and arrow. It means that I have a capacity to focus. I can aim for a goal. And it's easy for me to do that. But I grew up at a time when marriage and children were part of what a woman was expected to be. So I did get married, and I didn't think about whether I wanted children or not, really. It just sort of came with the package of this phase of my life. And when I got pregnant and when I had a child, when I went through labor and delivery, the archetype of the mother of Demeter, with the hormones, with the bonding, with what happened to me is that I became kind of enrolled in the feminist movement because it was such an initiation to be in labor and delivery and to realize from the standpoint of the pre-med medical student, the doctor, intern that I had been, that I delivered over 100 babies myself. But to be the woman and through whom the baby was coming, and to realize that this is what women have done forever, and how it was not only an initiation, but it was painful, and it was scary, and it was also something that changed me to realize that this is what women have been doing forever, and this is what patriarchy has made into something that was supposedly under male control, and this was also something that was sort of described as, well, you know, females do it, and it makes females more close to the sort of animal nature than men. Well, let me tell you that this particular initiation was more profound than the hardest internship in the country that I had taken, a rotating internship at Los Angeles County Hospital. And both were initiations. But this one had a profound effect also because of the time in which my first child was born in 1970, that this was the cusp of the decade of the women's movement. And so I had a consciousness that other women had provided to fit into what I was experiencing. So not every woman who has a child has the mother archetype evoked, and this then becomes a pain for her and for her children at some kind of psychic earth mother Demeter. Something is missing, and often the woman knows it and her children know that, for example, that she had them just because she was primarily Hera the wife. And so the husband becomes more important than whatever happens to the children, and we have a whole difficult and dysfunctional family story often. So it is what is. There's the archetype, and there is what evokes it. I had, fortunately, the experience of having the maternal archetype evoked or constellated in me. And I had the experience of being then in that wonderful position of nursing a child where I was Madonna in child. I was the goddess. Again, I needed the words to feel what this meant. I needed to be, through writing Goddesses and Everywoman, and I was writing about psychology. I wasn't writing about feminine spirituality, but because of when it came out, and because of the symbolic depth that goes with each of the goddesses, it became a text for women's spirituality as well. And it brought me into that movement and deepened my sense of what divinity was, and taught me about how the monotheism that I grew up with, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, much as it affected me and was transcendent in me, that there was another element of the feminine spirituality that was earth embodied, had to do with such things as the depth in which being a mother can be felt.
Part of what I'm hearing is that there's, with the way Western culture evolved, is that we, in many ways, limited the feminine expression to a couple of archetypes, or kind of channeled women into, particularly into just a couple of versions rather than like the full spectrum. And so you often end up with a disconnect between a woman's intrinsic nature and like what she's been socialized into. And so there's kind of this reclamation of that kind of more natural expression, which the goddesses, the panoply of goddesses, gives you kind of a language for.
That is so true. And never in the whole history of Western civilization has there been such an opportunity for women in the first world, in Europe and the United States, the educated women all over the world, in Africa and South and Central America and Asia, the women who have been affected by the women's liberation into education and to positions of responsibility outside of the home. Never, ever have we had, as women, as many potential possibilities to live into, and therefore to constellate or to evoke the different archetypes in us. And
go ahead. Go ahead.
I just wanted to contrast it with what's going on in places of the Middle East where women have to be covered up, and the only models they have is to be a wife and mother, and no choice whatsoever in that. I want women to realize, but for good fortune it is to be born at this time in the world that would tune into this kind of information, that this is such a privilege.
I'd love for you to give just maybe a quick overview of the 7 major goddess archetypes and then how people can start to really determine which ones are it's like a test or a self-revelation. How do you determine which ones are the dominant influences?
Stephen, I want to add one thing. The emphasis has been that this course only applies to women. That's not so, because most men have a feminine aspect in themselves and can touch into them through the images of the goddesses. Also, most men often fall in love with a particular archetype in a series of women, and since each archetype has a glowing positive side and a shadow side, that is some information that can be really helpful to men. I just wanted to emphasize that. I also wanted to say that there isn't exactly a simple test, except there's a simple test when you are not in touch with your archetypal depth. Then you have a sense of meaninglessness. Things are kind of blah. This is what depression looks like when there isn't any juice, because the archetypes give us juice to be in the moment. I mean, if you are living from an archetype, you are absolutely, you lose track of time. You love what you do, or you love who you're with, or you love how you are growing or creating, and you lose track of time. It is Kairos time. If you live out what other people expect you to do, you are doing time, and that's Chronos time. It's named after the god that swallowed his children. And so the simple test of do you have goddess energy activated in you is whether or not you know that there is something that you do, and when you do it and with whom you do it, you lose track of time and you are totally absorbed. If that's so, then you have a goddess or a god archetype that is acting in you, and you have you have vitality, you have creativity, you have a certain level of fun because you lose track of time. So then what you could do when you learn about what the various goddesses are is which one it is, and therefore not only which one it is that helps you, but what the shadow side of it is. So I named 7 goddesses. 6 are the original. 6 of them are the original great gods. I mean, there were 12 major, the pantheon of the Greek gods and goddesses. There were initially 12, and 6 of them that I have named are in that first initial pantheon, plus Persephone, because you can't speak about Demeter without speaking about Persephone. Plus, she is such a pattern in so many women. So I'm saying that to know the goddesses within is to truly know what gives your life meaning. And during a certain phase of life, one may be active, and then it gets kind of old. You kind of do the same old, and then when a new one becomes activated, it's a whole new phase. Sometimes, like with me, the Artemis archetype has gone through my life, but it deepens, and it's different in the I guess a third of adult life. The great goddess was known as Maiden Mother Crone, or young woman, prime of life woman, and wise woman, elder women. And there may be a different archetype that is mostly leading you in each of the phases of your life, or you may evolve in your life through one in particular, but the other ones are part of you too. I describe the goddesses as being something like a committee, that if you have a well-functioning ego chairing the committee, and you acknowledge and know what the goddesses are, who the goddesses are in you, and which ones are in conflict, which ones seem to dominate, and which ones are stirring in you, but have been put down maybe by your family or culture. Because one of the major contributions of Goddesses in Every Woman, and then when I wrote Gods in Every Man, I said I should have written a bigger book called Gods and Goddesses in Every Person, because all of us, men and women, have an experience of being in a Procrustan bed. If you were on the road to Athens, you had to pass Procrustes in his bed, and basically what happened is he sized you up. And if any part of you didn't fit the form, whack, it was cut off. And if some part were particularly pleasing, it was stretched to fit the mold. Well, every one of us who are put on the road to what our family, our religion, our culture thought is successful does that to us. So it's important to know the archetypes in us and the stereotypical or the expectations that are put on us. Only then is it possible to be conscious and make choices about who you are and what you want to do with your one wild and precious life. So I began with Artemis, Athena, and Hestia as the three virgin goddesses of ancient Greece. Virgin in psychological terms, meaning that this is an archetype, these are archetypes in women that do not need another person to be fulfilled. It makes them have a quality of one in themselves inside. That is, it's possible to be on your own track and less responsive, which is positive in some ways, negative in another, to the people and expectations that are put on you. Artemis, as I mentioned, is symbolized by the bow and arrow. She is Katniss Everdeen from the Hunger Games as a modern archetype. Her realm was the wilderness. So any girl, woman, who at some time or another liked to go camping, liked to ride horses, that sort of thing, is a natural, like to be outside, is a natural Artemis. Athena was the goddess of wisdom, strategy, and the practical arts. Her symbols were the spindle and the spear. You saw her wearing armor. She is the intellect of the group, and I think about her armor as often the intellectual armor. The intellectual armor that puts emotions at a distance. In her mythology, it was her competitiveness that did in her friendship. While Artemis went over she journeyed through the wilderness with her nymph companions that she chose. So she's a natural sister archetype. She is the archetype that got liberated by the women's movement. Athena, on the other hand, is the goddess who preferred heroes and was the right hand, the only divinity, male or female, that Father Zeus trusted with his symbols of power. So Athena thrived in centers of power. People like Condoleezza Rice, people who are in the city, rise up in the hierarchy, use their fine mind to strategize, with the shadow being the cut off from emotions. You have to kind of shed your intellectual armor and your defensiveness in order to be vulnerable, and that actually takes courage. And it's helpful sometimes for women who are Artemis or Athena to realize that the courage is not in confronting things, or not into going into danger zones, or being in the wilderness of whatever it is for the first time, but the courage it takes from the heart often is to show your vulnerability. Now, Hestia is the third virgin goddess in ancient Greek mythology, and I've mentioned her as being, she's a goddess of the hearth and goddess of the temple. And she was not part of the mythology of romance and conflict that is so much the Greek story. She doesn't have statues. She doesn't have paintings. She was considered present in the actual fire at the center of a round hearth. And when you think about a fire at the center of a round hearth in a building, in a home, at a time when there was no electricity. When you came in to that place where Hestia was glowing and on the hearth, being a source of light or illumination, a source of warmth, emotional as well as physical, and that she made the home and temple a sacred place. You have an invisible presence in Hestia. You have an energy that brings to the home a sense of order and serenity, and every other archetype, male and female, who with Hestia's fire has that particular archetype connected with a source of warmth and sacred energy. And she was present in the temples of every single god goddess. Now, if you ran into any of, especially the gods, who were good at raping and a number of things that power. I mean, they exercised power and had very little mercy as an archetype, which is true of a lot of archetypes, for that matter. You didn't want to encounter them on the road, but in the temple, when you encountered any of them, the highest qualities, the deepest meaning of them was experienced in the temple. So I am saying of all of these god goddesses that to be in touch with the archetype and with the archetype of meaning, which is Jung's archetype of self, that is when you really are living you're on your soul journey, and you are being who you are meant to be, which is the major point of the work I do. Now, the next three goddesses, Hera, Demeter, and Persephone, I put in a category called the vulnerable goddesses, because in their mythology, every single one of them was raped, humiliated, abducted, experienced powerlessness. And yet these are the archetypes that fulfill the relationship side of women. The goddess of marriage, Hera, in cultures that are, the more patriarchal the culture, the more a woman has to live this out, or she's nobody. Not only is she nobody, but in ancient times of, say, India, when your husband died, you were put on that funeral pyre with him. So, I mean, it wasn't, to survive in a patriarchal culture, you had to live out Hera. And not all women do. But some women who have her as an archetype, for this, it then becomes a sacred marriage. And the vulnerability to his unfaithfulness is what is so deeply meaning. I mean, it wounds a woman, and she gets obsessed then in her defensiveness, in her vulnerability to this marriage being so important. She can become paranoid. She can become jealous. She can become the shrew that Homer describes in Greek mythology. So Hera has the potential of being completed by and living out her deepest meaning in a good marriage, and she can be just absolutely devastated when marriage and the value of it to her is desecrated. Then there's Demeter, the goddess of the grain, mother of Persephone, archetype of the mother. In times gone past, every woman was expected to be pregnant and have many children. And this was her whole point. I mean, and often, as in the Middle East now, a husband can have 4 wives and lots of children, and the point of the woman was to breed and have children. Well, if you were not a Demeter, the whole experience of vulnerability, of pain, of the potential of dying in childbirth, to take this on because culture expected you was very different from what I described myself about what happens when the archetype is activated. And you realize that you are being the great mother in a sense, that new life, the miracle of life is coming through you. And that when you are nursing that child or holding that child or gazing upon that child and you are in that sacred Madonna child In every religion, there's this image of the goddess with the sacred child in her lap, and that's the archetype fulfilled. When it's not fulfilled, when Demeter experienced the abduction of her only daughter Persephone into the underworld, she went into a profound, agitated grief, depression. This particular archetype lends itself to serious depression at the loss of meaning. And it's not just necessarily the loss of the child. It for some women, Demeter is something that she has birthed, like an organization that she's put her heart and soul into, and it's stolen, it's abducted. Demeter, women susceptible to certain kinds of depression. Daughter Persephone was gathering flowers in the meadow when suddenly the earth opened up, and out of it came Hades to abduct her into the underworld. And this is the experience of loss of innocence. This is the experience that happens to girls and women a lot, but it also happens to boys and men. When you thought everything was fine, gathering flowers in the meadow is like doing what it is you do, and you enjoy, and the sun is shining, and you're a privileged member of, she was, after all, the child of a goddess of ancient Greece, and so everything was sunny. And then the earth gives way under you, and suddenly you're in the underworld of your fears. You're in the underworld where there is no sunlight, where you feel abandoned. And the story is called the Rape of Persephone. And this is what you feel when the ground gives out from under you, when what you trusted, who you trusted, even your very health that you expected to go well, gives way under you, and you get a diagnosis, you have cancer, and it might kill you. And your child is, something happens to your child, and you are helpless in it. Or you are aware in somewhere in your 30s or 40, even early 40s, that the Demeter archetype is stirring in you, and somehow you're not pregnant, you're having trouble getting pregnant, you're doing in vitro stuff, and it's still not working, and you're feeling the grieving Demeter inside of you during this time. You may not have had a Demeter strongly acting in you before, but now she is. So Persephone is the abducted one, but she, through her descent into the underworld, she returns. And when she returns, she then periodically goes back to the underworld, where she now is queen of the underworld. She now knows her ways around the underworld. There's many a therapist, a poet, an artist who, through a early depression, learned their way around the underworld, out of which comes the ability to be a guide for others. This is a model, by the way, for Alcoholics Anonymous. Only through the descent can you come back up and be a sponsor to someone else. This is where you learn from your own pain how to help somebody else. And the last of the goddesses is the most famous one, and this is Aphrodite. And I put her in a category all her own, and she is the one goddess yet to be liberated in the Western world, I think. We have caricatures of Aphrodite in our movie stars and whatever, and we follow their trajectory in the gossip magazines and things like that. But the goddess herself was viewed with reverence and with awe because of her power to move people deeply. She was always the goddess of love and beauty. They always went together. So she has become characterized as the goddess of the prostitute. Now that is so not what the archetype itself is. The archetypes, this is the creative woman, the lover, the woman who chooses herself who she will love, and in the alchemy between herself and who she loves, new life is born. That's the whole story of her many loves. She chose every single person, she began by choosing among the gods who were still eligible which one she would marry. She then, and probably since she chose to marry Hephaestus, who was the goddess of the forge and the craftsman, and that's the only relationship that did not result in a child. And the thought is that because of the connection of craft and love and beauty, the beauty of the objects that he created, and he was the really creative craftsman, that being connected, Hephaestus and Aphrodite as internal archetypes, is responsible for the creativity that comes out of the artisan. The love and beauty means that whenever you love something, you look at that, you gaze upon it, and know it's beautiful to you. It's so subjective. So all of these archetypes actually are essential ones, and some of them are stronger. And I haven't said anything much about the shadow side of them, but each of them do, both in terms of how they act on other people. For the man who falls in love with one of the virgin goddesses, when she goes off and forgets your existence, I would say don't take it personally, for example. It's only through your vulnerability that you might teach her something about paying attention to heart stuff. Anyway,
it's amazing to each of these. It's like, I know, and I'm so glad that we have a full 10-week program with you where you get to open and unfurl each of these archetypes, because it's the depth of your knowledge is so powerful. I'd love for you to just kind of like step back a little bit, and some of the things we talked about that we were going to share today, just about how we work with these different archetypes. So it's like there's the specificity, but then, how do we open to them more and move past fears and limitations, and how do we use them as a source of creativity and fulfillment?
Well, first there needs to be an awareness that something is missing. There's some vitality missing. And if there's a simple test about, are archetypes alive in you, that might be the one. I think about how in Cancer as a Turning Point, Lawrence LeSean's way of bringing back energy that leads to remission, being the same as individuation, being the same as touching into the deeper archetypes in yourself. But he said it very simply. He pushed his people, and initially he only got to work with the people who were diagnosed as terminal, so they were going to die anyway, so he could work with them. Well, initially, if you just focus on what's wrong, you would obviously have a lot to focus on in what's wrong. But he pushed them when he learned that didn't seem to help them. What helped them was putting them in touch with such things as asking the question, what can you imagine doing, or what did you used to do that made you glad to get up in the morning and look forward to doing it that day? What could you imagine doing, or what did you used to do that when you went to bed at night you felt good, tired? What I'm finding is that it's important to remember what you loved to do when you were a child, what your natural abilities seemed to be when you were a kid, what happened to you in growing up, in which it was cut off. It was, for a man it was cut yourself off from emotions. For an Athena who could do it more easily, that's what she did. And then in later life, and by midlife, it's like you're missing the connection. The thing about the soul or the psyche, and by the way, psyche is a Greek word that means soul, and it's also the classification for the butterfly, which obviously talks about transformation and change. And also there's a risk when you go from caterpillar to chrysalis. You dissolve in the chrysalis, and whether you make it through to being a butterfly is the iffy question. Well, it's it's our story too. And so by midlife, the question is, what is going on with you? I mean, this is when people come to see an analyst or psychiatrist. It's like wanting to know. Some part says I need help, that life has gotten meaningless, or I have a symptom that dominates me, and there must be more to life than this. Or then there's the major loss that has to be somehow felt, absorbed, learned from, and moved through. And then you get to the last third of life, which could be the wisdom years, could be a time to bloom. In fact, this is what I'm seeing in older women, that the first two phases of life is so dominated by other people's ideas about who you should be and what you should do. And here we are in a culture now, with thanks to modern medicine and things, where we are living for decades after we were supposed to have died. And there aren't these grand plans about what we should do with our one wild and precious life at this point. And this is when we can remember, and remember means like the opposite of dismembering. When you were cut off from sources of archetypal meaning in other phases of your life, whenever you can remember or reconnect with that, you get the energy from that archetype. And then I believe that what happens when you are in touch with that archetype and the archetype of the self, synchronicities happen. And what happens then is that you are offered opportunities. There are new choices. Some part of you has to rise to say yes. In life, as long as we're still here, our story is not over. As long as we're still here, the path may seem very, like I use the labyrinth as a model for how life often unfolds. In a labyrinth, there are no dead ends. You think that you are close to the center, and then there's a dead end. There's what you think was a dead end, but really it is a U-turn. I use a short labyrinth as a path example. There are 28 U-turns on that. With my activism, with my work with individual patients in long-term work, with my own life, I am very much aware that there are times when it seemed like, well, it was. A phase was over. I thought I was headed in a certain direction. And then, oops, something else changed it.
Well, that kind of speaks to something I want to spend a little time talking about your upcoming program, because we're very excited about it, and B, it also speaks to this need to really open to the full spectrum of all of these different archetypes, because as you're saying, different phases of life, different challenges that we face, we have to draw upon these deeper archetypes, and mostly we've been socialized into, a couple of tracks, or probably not even the most authentic track. And so really claiming that natural energy, as well as opening to the full spectrum of the other archetypes, can be so valuable, so that we can just navigate with a lot more clarity and joy and power in different ways. So maybe if you can share a little bit about why, as we move into talking about the upcoming program, like why it's so important to expand our range and open to these different currents, and how do we start to integrate them in our life?
Let me tell you why I said why I wanted to do this course when I had the opportunity. When you told me I had an opportunity to be on the SHIP network, my first reaction was in that one conversation was not to jump at the chance. And it was only in our discussion that I was remembering the women who spoke to me at the Parliament, who had read Goddesses and Everywoman years ago, and had come up to me and said, that changed my life. And I hadn't thought about Goddesses and Everywoman for a while. I just use it all the time, so it's rather natural. And meanwhile, my own energy field is towards activism in bringing women in the world together for Fifth Women's UN World Women on Conference, 5WCW, Fifth World UN World Conference on Women, where it started with the main circle, with circles with a spiritual center. This is Hestia at the center of a circle of women. And it was because I'm beginning to realize that you start wherever, I know I'm not beginning to realize, we each start wherever we are. And to start with the goddesses is to start with taking care of what's true in yourself. And when you get in touch with that, what you begin to know is how life is different when you are archetypally connected to your meaning. Mm-hmm. And so that's the beginning place. And then one of the other reasons for wanting to do Shift had to do with learning that you can put members who take this course into circles. You can meet others online with this program. I'm wanting them, those that are interested in, to become parts of circles online and to learn.
That's where it all comes together.
Let
me also just share the title, just orient people a little. So the course is going to be called Liberating the Goddesses in You, Deepening Your Life's Journey Through the Wisdom of 7 Feminine Archetypes. And Jean has been gracious enough to extend this to a full 10 weeks, which normally our introductory programs are only 7 weeks. So this allows you to go much deeper, create the deeper circles and connections, and explore all of the archetypes. You can find the whole program laid out at Goddesses in You course. That's YOU, goddessesinyoucourse.com. And so it's going to take on all of these different archetypes and explore each of them in depth and really activate the unique expression of you and through the archetypes and through this amazing virtual circle of women. So we're very, very, and probably some men as well. So we're very excited about it. And Jean, maybe in your own words, if you just share, what do people get from taking this journey? How does their life grow, expand, deepen?
One of the major things is to realize that your life and how you spend your life energy is your great work, or magnus opus. That this is what we came into the world to live. Life is short. We were born into our particular version of dysfunctional family, more than likely. And the questions about what is our purpose? What did we come to do here? What did we come to learn here in this life? Who did we come to love? What are we here for? Time to time in our lives, when what we are doing comes together with the archetype that gives it meaning, we have a sense of coherence. We have a sense of living the life that we came to live. And then there will be the human realities of bad things happen, pain happens. How do you respond to it? Becoming a real test of, will you be a protagonist in your own story? Will you overcome the very real difficulties that you encounter, the betrayals that you meet? Will you become a victim, or will you not? Will you become a heroine in your own story? At the United Nations, where I have been actively advocating for UN World Conference on Women, 5th World Conference on Women, I came to know the women who head non-governmental organizations from all over the world that have to do with girls and women. And to understand what is going on in many places of the world and the horrible kinds of things that can happen to girls and women. And then to see women for whom it may have actually happened, like they were trafficked, and they changed in the experience from a victim to becoming starting the organizations or being a volunteer in the organizations that now rescue girls and women from that fate. I think that every single NGO that is on the ground has women who are working with whatever the cause is out of their own response to something very similar that happened to them. So I wanted to reflect back to them and wrote in Moving Toward the Millionth Circle what an assignment is. And again, it's back to the archetypes, although I don't use the word archetypes when I'm talking to the UN. And so it's sort of the language used. But if an assignment comes along with your name on it, only you can answer the question. Only you can answer to it by saying yes to, will this be meaningful? 1. 2, will it be fun? And 3, is it motivated by love? Now, people do not expect, will it be fun, to be part of being an activist to change the world. But anything in which you do that uses you and your experience, that helps you to grow and put something out into the world that is new because it came through you, anything that has you doing it with other people who share your values, this is fun. It is fun to do something that is meaningful, motivated by love, and in good company. So that's another way of saying, what do I want people to do? I want people to understand that in our lives, we are choice makers, but we have to become conscious first. So the archetypal underpinnings that you learn help you to understand yourself and what is deeply meaningful to you. And that's really important because you are the author of your own life in so many ways, of the story of your own life. I mean, all the things that happened to you that and many of them should never have happened. They did. And that makes you a protagonist, heroine in your own story, or a victim. And that's my work. It's to work with people to see that everything that happens to them, everything that has happened to them could be something that could go into the depth of who they are and who they are becoming.
Well, clearly it's an amazing journey of self-knowledge that you're offering. And I also want to circle back where you're talking about when you're losing time, when you plug into the archetypes and you're really in the kairos of feeling completely absorbed in what you're doing. That also connects to the fun of the activism. So when people plug into the natural archetypes and these larger forces, there's a sense of being, all of a sudden you're a vehicle for something larger that's joyful, that's natural, that's self-expressive, and that also changes the world. So I love this balance between the sort of deep inner inquiry and then the outer expression, which is really at the heart of why we created the Shift Network as well. So I feel like your work is really a beautiful bridge between those two. So we don't have a lot of time, but I'd love for you to just take a quick tour of the curriculum. The course is going to run on Wednesdays at noon Pacific time, and again, it's a 10-week program, so you get some bonus classes over our usual introductory program. But it's going to take a full tour of all the different goddesses. Maybe if you can just give a quick overview, and we'll say a few more things about the program after that.
Stephen, I wanted to add one thing.
Sure.
Many of the Jungians who have followed my work are not in the United States and not in Pacific time. And please do emphasize that how they can hear it, everyone is recorded, that sort of thing.
Yes, we do. Everything is both live. We have it live so you can access and ask questions of Jean and really engage in the dialogue and groups afterwards. But it's also recorded and fully transcribed, so you get all of the content, even if you are. And it's very helpful in the future to be able to reference back and get the exact passages and really reflect on them and do the practices that Jean will give. So it's a great combo.
This is what has so impressed me. That they can miss one and tune in, and tune into it. They can get a transcript of it, and all of this could be really helpful. Now, what was that question again before?
So I'd love to hear you give just a bit of a tour overview of some of the modules that people will be learning about.
Well, I'm beginning with you are the protagonist in your own life story. And it comes from the words from Mary Oliver's poem, A Summer Day, which ends, tell me, well, no, she says, doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what do you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? What do you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? It's a challenge to the listeners, the participants in this, in my course. I want them to know that and to feel it. And then I will do more of this about how can you know the goddesses within yourself, and to know them is to know really yourself better. And then I go over, this is the pleasure that I am looking forward to, is I've never given a course in depth where I have like I can talk about each goddess in turn, talk about the shadow, can talk about the gifts, can talk about the story. I can tell story. I'm a storyteller. That's how I do most of my workshops. I always begin with the story, so I get to. I have time to tell the myth of the goddess, the lineage, the myths, and the stories, and amplify them as I go along, or interpret them as I go along, which is different from the more linear way that it's written in the book. So this is why I'm looking forward to teaching, is I actually get to spend from whole module on Artemis, goddess of the Hutt and Moon, one on Athena, goddess of wisdom, strategy, and practical crafts, Hestia, goddess of the hearth and temple, Hera, the goddess of marriage, Demeter, the goddess of grain and mother Persephone, and Persephone, the maiden and queen of the underworld, and then Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, the archetype of the lover and creative woman. And then I'm assuming that I will get questions that I can respond to from women and men who have encountered these aspects of the particular goddess archetype. So I'm assuming that this is going to be a very lively, possible kind of a thing. In my workshops, I often do a guided meditation, and I may, not in all of them, but in some of them. And also there's some pieces of music that really help evoke energies in people that I've used in workshops, and not in all of them, but in some of them, where I feel that a bit of music and going into silence might really be evocative. I'll do that. This is a creative realm for me to teach. So though everything is outlined.
Yeah, it's going to be super exciting. I was going to tell people you can find all the details on the modules, because there's quite a lot at goddessesinYoucourse.com. I really always encourage you, if you're thinking about joining a program, to go and read through the whole page and then meditate on it, because it gives you a sense for all the different dimensions. You get some slices of it here on the call, and you can get, but when you really feel into all that you're going to learn and really fall in love with all these different archetypes, one of the things that I see is so beautiful when you embrace all these different archetypes, you not only see and embrace those qualities and have access to them in yourself, but then you also have a greater range of appreciation for particularly women in the world and the many different ways it expresses, and opens up your spectrum of possibility for how the feminine expresses in the world. So again, you can find it all at Goddesses in You course. It starts on February 17th. We're doing it at Wednesdays at noon Pacific, and that allows more live participation from Europe and other places. And I also want to draw attention, there's a number of great extra bonuses that complement the core teachings and exploration. And there's one with an audio interview with Jean called Standing by Trees, Women and Girls. There's also a Global Spirit video with Jean and Roger Walsh, who's a transpersonal psychologist, very wise fellow. It's called The Call of Wisdom. And there's also you get a copy of Jean's keynote address from the Third International Women's Peace Conference called Heeding the Urgent Message from Mother. And we have another extra bonus, which is available only today, which gives you a little bit of extra incentive to go to the page today and meditate. And if you're getting a yes internally, to just go for it. And so you get this when you register by midnight tonight. It's called The Grail and the Goddess: A Healing Paradigm for Psyche and Planet. And that's a video from the 7th International Conference on Science and Consciousness. And Jean, you want to say anything more about The Grail and the Goddess?
The Grail is an image of the goddess. A chalice is, of course, filled with sacred blood. Applies both to the Christian symbol and to the goddess symbol.
Beautiful. Well, it's a great extra bonus that you get when you sign up today only. And so we've kept the price very accessible. Decided to just do the $297 for payment in full, which is about 10% discount off the 3 payments of $109. So it's super accessible. It's going to be a great program. We're anticipating a lot of folks, and which always means the Facebook community is also really lively and a great place to meet people and really go deeper and share your life journey and evolve together. So it's going to be a great program. You can find all the details at goddessesinYoucourse.com. So Jean, we're just so delightful to spend this time with you. You're such a wise woman and fascinating to listen to. So I'm really grateful to be partnering with you on the upcoming program, and I know people are in for a real treat. So thank you for the time you've taken here today, and also for embarking on this new journey into internet teaching, which is, I know, a whole new world for you. So it's exciting that you chose us to embark on this journey with. So anything else that you wanted to share with the people who are considering joining you for the Liberating the Goddesses in You course?
No, I'm assuming that those who sign up are going to feel that they've joined a community and they've gotten some juicy insights into themselves. And I think wisdom and fun go together, and that's my assumption that this course
That's the best kind of wisdom. Well, thank you for sharing your wisdom and fun here today. And for all of you listening, again, you can find details on Liberating the Goddesses in You at goddessesinYoucourse.com, and you get the extra bonus when you sign up today by midnight. So thank you all for joining, and thank you for this commitment to reclaim the deeper feminine, the full spectrum of the feminine, and also, Jean, to put that in service to shifting our world through activism. So it's a beautiful combination you've offered of the depth, inquiry, wisdom, and the positive impact on the planet. So thank you, and thank you all for joining. So have a beautiful rest of your day. And again, that one last time, that URL is goddessesinYoucourse.com. So thanks all, and hope to see you in the upcoming program with Jean. Goodbye now.